And so the data layer of the defense in depth model is definitely one that I think most folks seem to understand. It's one of the ones that we just make assumptions around. We assume that data is secure. We assume that data is always protected. And remember, we're talking about an architecture. We're talking about really a thought model or a thought process for looking at security. So we're going to avoid really specific details or really specific implementation recommendations here and just talk about the concept of at the data layer of the defense in depth model. What does that mean? What are we talking about when we talk about protecting data? And I tend to subdivide these two things into data at rest and data in transit. Data at rest simply means data, a file written on a hard drive, or some information stored on a thumb drive, or some information that's actually kept somewhere where it's not moving. That's pretty obvious, right? At rest, not moving. Versus in transit, data flying across a network, data that's being transmitted and received on Ethernet, on a phone when it's being transmitted and received on a phone, data that's being sent and received over wireless networks or even through a terminal server session, a remote desktop session. That's data at transit or in transit. And those are very, very different at the data layer of the defense in depth model. Those are really the two ways to think about it, because a lot of folks I find when they're modeling security, they consider files that are stored on the hard drive, but never how those files get printed or how those files get synced up to a cloud service or something like that. They're very, very, very different. And I would say in many cases, data protection in transit has nothing to do with data protection at rest. And data protection at rest has nothing to do with data protection in transit. Examples include, so for stored data or data protection at rest, stuff like file system encryption. On Windows, it would be BitLocker or EFS, but there's lots and lots of them. There's TrueCrypt. There's all kinds of different stuff. Even on devices, there's almost always on portable devices, there's a protect my data or encrypt my data button or feature of these devices. Whatever that happens to be. That's a concept of data at rest being protected. Is it always necessary? No, of course it's not. Does anybody really care if they can steal, breach the confidentiality, or change my afternoon shopping list when I go to Target? Make me buy extra diapers or fewer diapers? No, most people don't care. That's not necessarily worth protecting. Some data, obviously in corporate environments and big businesses, is worth protecting at rest. As well as in transit. When data is being transmitted and received, it's oftentimes easier to intercept, especially because, and you'll see in a moment when we talk about networks, that data will be transiting in secure media or being exposed to potential attackers. So concepts there are VPN encryption or tunneling, IP security or IPsec, things like that, SSL, whatever it happens to be, protecting the data in transit. They're very, very different. And there definitely are good places to use either of them or both of them. They're not always both necessary, though. And remember that neither of them are necessarily critical in all situations.